Welcome back, peasants of Camelmore, to another exciting episode of The Princess and the Goblin. We are now on Chapter 20 and on Episode 10 of our little bedtime story series. We've made it pretty far, but we still have about 12 more chapters to go, so let's just jump right in. Remember, Curdy is stuck with the goblins. The Goblin royal family have stuck Curdy into the wall, and he is now coming up with rhymes and figuring out a way to get out. But for now, he sleeps. Chapter 20, titled Irene's Clue. Curdy already had his clue. Now it's time for Irene. That same morning, early, the princess woke in a terrible fright. There was a hideous noise in her room of creatures snarling and hissing and racketing about as if they were fighting. The moment she came to herself, she remembered something she had never thought of again. What her grandmother told her to do when she was frightened. She immediately took off her ring and put it under her pillow. As she did so, she fancied she felt a finger and thumb take it gently from under her palm.
"It must be my grandmother,"
she said to herself, and the thought gave her such courage that she stopped to put on her dainty little slippers before running from the room. While doing this, she caught sight of a long cloak of sky blue thrown over the back of a chair by her bedside. She had never seen it before, but it was evidently waiting for her. She put it on, and then, feeling with the forefinger of her right hand, soon found her grandmother's thread, which she proceeded at once to follow, expecting it would lead her straight up the old stair. When she reached the door, she found it went down and ran along the floor, so that she had almost to crawl in order to keep a hold of it. Then, to her surprise, and somewhat to her dismay, she found that instead of leading her toward the stair, it turned in quite the opposite direction. It led her through certain narrow passages toward the kitchen, turning aside ere she reached it, and guiding her to a door which communicated with a small backyard. Some of the maids were already up, and this door was standing open. Across the yard, the thread still ran along the ground until it brought her to a door in the wall, which opened upon the mountainside. When she had passed through, the thread rose to about half her height, and she could hold it with ease as she walked. It led her straight up the mountain. The cause of her alarm was less frightful than she supposed. The cook's great black cat, pursued by the housekeeper's terrier, had bounced against her bedroom door, which had not been properly fastened, and the two had burst into her room together and commenced a battle royale. How the nurse came to sleep through it was a mystery, but I suspect the old lady had something to do with it. It was a clear, warm morning. The wind blew deliciously over the mountainside. Here and there she saw a late primrose, but she did not stop to call on them. The sky was mottled with small clouds. The sun was not yet up, but some of their fluffy edges had caught his light and hung out orange and gold-colored fringes upon the air. The dew lay in round drops upon the leaves and hung like tiny diamonds from the blades of grass about her path.
"How lovely that bit of gossamer is,"
thought the princess, looking at a long, undulating line that shone at some distance from her up the hill. It was not the time for gossamers, though, and Irene soon discovered that it was her own thread she saw shining on before her in the light of the morning. It was leading her she knew not whither, but she had never in her life been out before sunrise, and everything was so fresh and cool and lively and full of something coming that she felt too happy to be afraid of anything. After leading her up a good distance, the thread turned to the left and down the path upon which she and Looty had met Curdy. But she never thought of that, for now, in the morning light, with its far outlook over the country, no path could have been more open and airy and cheerful. She could see the road almost to the horizon, along which she had so often watched her King Papa and his troop come shining with the bugle blast cleaving the air before them, and it was like a companion to her. Down and down the path went, then up, and then down, and then up again, getting rugged and more rugged as it went. Still along the path went the silvery thread, and still along the thread went Irene's little rosy-tipped forefinger. By and by, she came to a little stream that jabbered and prattled down the hill, and up the side of the stream went both path and thread. And still the path grew rougher and steeper, and the mountain grew wilder, till Irene began to think she was going a very long way from home. And when she turned to look back, she saw that the level country had vanished, and the rough bare mountain had closed in about her. But still on went the thread, and on went the princess. Everything around her was getting brighter and brighter as the sun came nearer, till at length his first rays all at once alighted on the top of a rock before her, like some golden creature fresh from the sky. Then she saw that the little stream ran out of a hole in that rock, that the path did not go past the rock, and that the thread was leading her straight up to it. A shudder ran through her from head to foot when she found that the thread was actually taking her into the hole out of which the stream ran. It ran out babbling joyously, but she had to go in. She did not hesitate. Right into the hole she went, which was high enough to let her walk without stooping. For a little way, there was a brown glimmer, but at the first turn it all but ceased, and before she had gone many paces, she was in total darkness. Then she began to be frightened indeed. Every moment she kept feeling the thread backward, and as she went farther and farther into the darkness of the great hollow mountain, she kept thinking more and more about her grandmother, and all that she had said to her, and how kind she had been, and how beautiful she was, and all about her lovely room, and the fire of roses, and the great lamp that sent its light through stone walls. And she became more and more sure that the thread could not have gone there of itself, and that her grandmother must have sent it. But it tried her dreadfully when the path went down very steep, and especially when she came to places where she had to go down rough stairs, and even, sometimes, a ladder. Through one narrow passage after another, over lumps of rocks and sand and clay, the thread guided her, until she came to a small hole through which she had to creep. Finding no change on the other side,
"Shall I ever get back?"
she thought, over and over again, wondering at herself that she was not 10 times more frightened, and often feeling as if she were only walking in the story of a dream. Sometimes she heard the noise of water, a dull gurgling inside the rock. By and by she heard the sounds of blows, which came nearer and nearer, but again they grew duller and almost died away. In 100 directions she turned, obedient to the guiding thread. At last she spied a dull red shine, and came up to the mica window. Remember, mica is that glass-looking rock. And thence away and round about, and right into the cavern, where glowed the red embers of a fire. Here the thread began to rise. It rose as high as her head, and higher still. What should she do if she lost her hold? She was pulling it down. She might break it. She could see it far up, glowing as red as her fire opal in the light of the embers. But presently she came to a huge heap of stones, piled in a slope against the wall of the cavern. On these she climbed, and soon recovered the level of the thread, only, however, to find, the next moment, that it vanished through the heap of stones, and left her standing on it, with her face to the solid rock. For one terrible moment, she felt as if her grandmother had forsaken her. The thread which the spiders had spun far over the seas, which her grandmother had sat in the moonlight and spun again for her, which she had tempered in the rose fire and tied to her opal ring, had left her, had gone where she could no longer follow it, had brought her into a horrible cavern, and there left her. She was forsaken indeed.
"When shall I wake?"
she said to herself in an agony, but at the same moment knew that it was no dream. She threw herself upon the heap and began to cry. It was well she did not know what creatures, one of them with stone shoes on her feet, were lying in the next cave. But neither did she know who was on the other side of the slab. At length the thought struck her that at least she could follow the thread backward and thus get out of the mountain and home. She rose at once and found the thread, but the instant she tried to feel it backward, it vanished from her touch. Forward, it led her hand up the heap of stones. Backward, it seemed nowhere. Neither could she see it as before in the light of the fire. She burst into a wailing cry and again threw herself down on the stones. And there's chapter 20. The chapter was a little stressful for Irene, wasn't it, Rolfe?
She just followed the thread all the way, and then she got stuck in the caves, and she blames her grandmother.
Do you think it was her grandmother's fault?
Well, yes, she's the one who gave Irene the string. Maybe she's an evil witch.
Or maybe Irene doesn't yet know where the string is leading her. Let's find out.
Okay.
Chapter 21. The Escape. As the princess lay and sobbed, she kept feeling the thread mechanically, following it with her finger many times up the stone in which it disappeared. By and by, she began, still mechanically, to poke her finger in after it between the stones as far as she could. All at once, it came into her head that she might remove some of the stones and see where the thread went next. Almost laughing at herself for never having thought of this before, she jumped to her feet. Her fear vanished. Once more, she was certain her grandmother's thread could not have brought her there just to leave her there. And she began to throw away the stones from the top as fast as she could, sometimes 2 or 3 at a handful, sometimes taking both hands to lift one. After clearing them away a little, she found that the thread turned and went straight downward. Hence, as the heap sloped a good deal, growing of course wider towards its base, she had to throw away a multitude of stones to follow the thread. But this was not all, for she soon found that the thread, after going straight down for a little way, turned first sideways in one direction, then sideways in another, and then shot at various angles, hither and thither, inside the heap, so that she began to be afraid that to clear the thread she must remove the whole huge gathering. She was dismayed at the very idea, but, losing no time, set to work with a will, and, with aching back and bleeding fingers and hands, she worked on, sustained by the pleasure of seeing the heap slowly diminish, and begin to show itself on the opposite side of the fire. Another thing which helped to keep her courage was that as often as she uncovered a turn of the thread, instead of lying loose upon the stones, it tightened up. This made her sure that her grandmother was at the end of it somewhere. She had got about halfway down when she started, and nearly fell with fright. Close to her ear, as it seemed, a voice broke out, singing,
"Jabber ball the smash, you'll have it in a crash. Jabber smash bother, you'll have the worst of the pother. Smash bother jabber."
Here, Curdie stopped, either because he could not find a rhyme to jabber, or because he remembered what he had forgotten when he woke up at the sound of Irene's labors, that his plan was to make the goblins think he was getting weak. But he had uttered enough to let Irene know who he was.
It's Curdie!
She cried joyfully.
"Hush, hush,
Came Curdie's voice again from somewhere.
speak softly."
Why? You were singing loud.
Said Irene.
"Yes, but they know I'm here, and they don't know you are. Who are you?"
I'm Irene.
Answered the princess.
I know who you are quite well. You're Curdie.
"Why, however did you come here, Irene?"
My great-great-grandmother sent me, and I think I found out why. You can't get out, I suppose?
"No, I can't. What are you doing?"
Clearing away a huge heap of stones.
"There's a princess!"
Exclaimed Curdie in a tone of delight, but still speaking in little more than a whisper.
"I can't think how you got here, though."
My grandmother sent me after her thread.
"I don't know what you mean,
Said Curdie.
but so you're there. It doesn't much matter."
Oh, yes, it does.
Returned Irene.
I should never have been here but for her.
"Well, you can tell me all about it when we get out then. There's no time to lose now."
Said Curdie, and Irene went to work as fresh as when she began.
There's such a lot of stones.
She said.
It will take me a long time to get them all away.
"How far on have you got?"
Asked Curdie.
I've got about half the way, but the other half is ever so much bigger.
"I don't think you will have to move the lower half. Do you see a slab laid up against the wall?"
Irene looked and felt about with her hands, and soon perceived the outlines of the slab.
Yes,
She answered.
I do.
"Then I think
Rejoined Curdie.
when you have cleared the slab about halfway down, or a little more, I shall be able to push it over."
I must follow my thread,
Returned Irene.
whatever I do.
"What do you mean?
exclaimed Curdie.
You will see when you get out of here.
Answered the princess, and then she went on harder than ever. But she was soon satisfied that what Curdie wanted done and what the thread wanted done were one and the same thing, for she not only saw that by following the turns of the thread she had been clearing the face of the slab, but that, a little more than halfway down, the thread went through the chink between the slab and the wall into the place where Curdie was confined, so that she could not follow it any farther until the slab was out of her way. As soon as she found this, she said in a right joyous whisper,
Now, Curdie, I think if you were to give a great push, the slab would tumble over.
Stand quite clear of it then,
said Curdie.
and let me know when you are ready.
Irene got off the heap and stood on one side of it.
Now, Curdie!
She cried. Curdie gave a great rush with his shoulder against it. Out tumbled the slab on the heap, and out crept Curdie over the top of it.
You've saved my life, Irene,
He whispered.
Oh, Curdie, I'm so glad. Let's get out of this horrid place as fast as we can.
That's easier said than done,
returned he.
Oh, no! It's quite easy,
said Irene.
We have only to follow my thread. I am sure that it's going to take us out now.
She had already begun to follow it over the fallen slab into the hole, while Curdie was searching the floor of the cavern for his pickaxe.
Here it is,
he cried.
Oh, no, it's not,
he added in a disappointed tone.
What can it be then? I declare, it's a torch! That is jolly! It's better almost than my pickaxe. Much better if it weren't for those stone shoes,
he went on as he lighted the torch by blowing the last embers of the expiring fire. When he looked up, with the lighted torch casting a glare into the great darkness of the huge cavern, he caught sight of Irene disappearing into the hole out of which he had himself just come.
Where are you going there?
He cried.
That's not the way out! That's where I couldn't get out!
I know that,
whispered Irene.
but this is the way my thread goes, and I must follow it.
What nonsense the child talks,
said Curdie to himself.
I must follow her, though, and see that she comes to no harm. She will soon find she can't get out that way, and then she will come with me.
So he crept once more over the slab into the hole with his torch in his hand. But when he looked about in it, he could see her nowhere, and now he discovered that although the hole was narrow, it was much larger than he had supposed, for in one direction the roof came down very low, and the hole went off in a narrow passage, of which he could not see the end. The princess must have crept in there. He got on his knees, and one hand, holding the torch with the other, and crept after her. The hole twisted about, in some parts so low that he could hardly get through, in others so high that he could not see the roof. But everywhere it was narrow, far too narrow for a goblin to get through, and so I presume they never thought that Curdie might. He was beginning to feel very uncomfortable lest he could not see the end. The princess, when he heard her voice almost close to his ear, whispering,
Aren't you coming, Curdie?
And when he turned the next corner, there she stood waiting for him.
I knew you couldn't go wrong in that narrow hole, but now you must keep by me, for here is a great wide place,
she said.
I can't understand it,
said Curdie, half to himself, half to Irene.
Never mind,
she returned.
Wait till we get out.
Curdie, utterly astonished that she had already got so far, and by a path he had known nothing of, thought it better to let her do as she pleased.
At all events,
he said again to himself,
I know nothing about the way, minor as I am, and she seems to think she does know something about it, though how she should passes my comprehension. So she's just as likely to find her way as I am, and as she insists on taking the lead, I must follow. We can't be much worse off than we are anyhow.
Reasoning thus, he followed her a few steps and came out in another great cavern, across which Irene walked in a straight line, as confidently as if she knew every step of the way. Curdie went on after her, flashing his torch about and trying to see something of what lay around them. Suddenly, he started back a pace as the light fell upon something close by which Irene was passing. It was a platform of rock raised a few feet from the floor and covered with sheepskins, upon which lay two horrible figures asleep, at once recognized by Curdie as the king and queen of the goblins. He lowered his torch instantly, lest the light should awake them. As he did so, it flashed upon his pickaxe, lying by the side of the queen, whose hand lay close by the handle of it.
Stop one moment, he whispered. Hold my torch, and don't let the light on their faces.
Irene shuddered when she saw the frightful creatures whom she had passed without observing them. But she did as he requested, and, turning her back, held the torch low in front of her. Curdie drew his pickaxe carefully away, and as he did so, spied one of her feet projecting from under the skins. The great clumsy granite shoe exposed thus to his hand was a temptation not to be resisted. He laid hold of it, and, with cautious efforts, drew it off. The moment he succeeded, he saw, to his astonishment, that what he had sung in ignorance to annoy the queen was actually true. She had 6 horrible toes. Overjoyed at his success, and seeing by the huge bump in the sheepskins where the other foot was, he proceeded to lift them gently, for if he could only succeed in carrying away the other shoe as well, he would be no more afraid of the goblins than of so many flies. But as he pulled at the second shoe, the queen gave a growl and sat up in bed. The same instant, the king awoke also and sat up beside her.
Run, Irene!
Cried Curdie, for though he was not now in the least afraid for himself, he was for the princess. Irene looked once round, saw the fearful creatures awake, and, like the wise princess she was, dashed the torch on the ground and extinguished it, crying out,
Here, Curdie, take my hand!
He darted to her side, forgetting neither the queen's shoe nor his pickaxe, and caught hold of her hand. As she sped fearlessly where her thread guided her, they heard the queen give a great bellow. But they had a good start, for it would be some time before they could get torches lighted to pursue them. Just as they thought they saw a gleam behind them, the thread brought them to a very narrow opening, through which Irene crept easily and Curdie with difficulty.
Now,
said Curdie,
I think we shall be safe.
Of course we shall.
returned Irene.
Why do you think so?
Asked Curdie.
Because my grandmother is taking care of us.
That's all nonsense.
Said Curdie.
I don't know what you mean.
Then if you don't know what I mean, what right have you to call it nonsense?
Asked the princess, a little offended.
I beg your pardon, Irene.
Said Curdie.
I did not mean to vex you.
Of course not.
Returned the princess.
But why do you think we shall be safe?
Because the king and queen are far too stout to get through that hole. Ha!
There may be ways around.
Said the other.
To be sure, there might. We are not out of it yet.
Acknowledged Curdie.
But what do you mean by the king and the queen?
Asked the princess.
I should never call a creature such as those a king and a queen.
Their own people do, though.
Answered Curdie. The princess asked more questions, and Curdie, as they walked leisurely along, gave her a full account, not only of the character and habits of the goblins, so far as he knew them, but of his own adventures with them, beginning from the very night after that in which he had met her and Looty upon the mountain. When he had finished, he begged Irene to tell him how it was that she had come to his rescue. So Irene too had to tell a long story, which she did in rather a roundabout manner, interrupted by many questions concerning things she had not explained. But her tale, as she did not believe more than half of it, left everything as unaccountable to him as before, and he was nearly as much perplexed as to what he must think of the princess. He could not believe that she was deliberately telling stories, and the only conclusion he could come to was that Looty had been playing the child's tricks, inventing no end of lies to frighten her for her own purposes.
But however did Looty come to let you go into the mountain alone?
He asked.
Looty knows nothing about it. I left her fast asleep. At least, I think so. I hope my grandmother won't let her get into trouble, for it wasn't her fault at all, as my grandmother very well knows.
But how did you find your way to me?
Persisted Curdie.
I told you already.
Answered Irene.
By keeping my finger upon my grandmother's thread, as I am doing now.
You don't mean you got the thread there?
Of course I do. I have told you so 10 times already. I have hardly, except when I was removing the stones, taken my finger off it. There.
She added, guiding Curdie's hand to the thread.
You feel it yourself, don't you?
I feel nothing at all.
Replied Curdie.
Then what can be the matter with your finger? I feel it perfectly. To be sure, it is very thin, and in the sunlight looks just like the thread of a spider, though there are many of them twisted together to make it. But for all that, I can't think why you shouldn't feel it as well as I do.
Curdie was too polite to say he did not believe there was any thread there at all. What he did say was,
Well, I can make nothing of it.
I can, though, and you must be glad of that, for it will do for both of us.
We're not out yet.
said Curdie.
We soon shall be.
Returned Irene confidently, and now the thread went downward, and led Irene's hand to a hole in the floor of the cavern, whence came a sound of running water which they had been hearing for some time.
It goes into the ground now, Curdie,
she said, stopping. He had been listening to another sound, which his practiced ear had caught long ago, and which also had been growing louder. It was the noise the goblin miners made at their work, and they seemed to be at no great distance now. Irene heard it the moment she stopped.
What is that noise?
She asked.
Do you know, Curdie?
Yes, it is the goblins digging and burrowing.
He answered.
And don't you know for what purpose they do it?
No, I haven't the least idea. Would you like to see them?
He asked, wishing to have another try after their secret.
If my thread took me there, I shouldn't much mind, but I don't want to see them, and I can't leave my thread. It leads me down into the hole, and we had better go at once.
Very well. Shall I go in first?
Said Curdie.
No, better not. You can't feel the thread.
She answered, stepping down through a narrow break in the floor of the cavern.
Oh!
She cried.
I am in the water. It is running strong. But it is not deep, and there is just room to walk. Make haste, Curdie.
He tried, but the hole was too small for him to get in.
Go on, a little bit.
He said, shouldering his pickaxe. In a few moments, he had cleared a large opening and followed her. They went on, down and down with the running water, Curdie getting more and more afraid it was leading them to some terrible gulf in the heart of the mountain. In one or two places, he had to break away the rock to make room before even Irene could get through, at least without hurting herself. But at length, they spied a glimmer of light, and in a minute more, they were almost blinded by the full sunlight into which they emerged. It was some little time before the princess could see well enough to discover that they stood in her own garden, close by the seat on which she and her king papa had sat that afternoon. They had come out by the channel of the little stream. She danced and clapped her hands with delight.
Now, Curdie,
She cried,
won't you believe what I told you about my grandmother and her thread?
for she had felt all the time that Curdie was not believing what she had told him.
There, don't you see it shining on before us?
She added.
I don't see anything.
Persisted Curdie.
Then you must believe without seeing,
Said the princess.
for you can't deny it has brought me out of the mountain.
I can't deny we are out of the mountain, and I should be very ungrateful indeed to deny that you had brought me out of it.
I couldn't have done it but for the thread.
Persisted Irene.
That's the part I don't understand.
Well, come along and Looty will get you something to eat. I am sure you must want it very much.
Indeed I do, but my father and mother will be so anxious about me. I must make haste. First, up the mountain to tell my mother, and then down into the mine again to acquaint my father.
Very well, Curdie, but you can't get out without coming this way, and I will take you through the house, for that is nearest.
They met no one by the way, for indeed, as before, the people were here and there and everywhere searching for the princess. When they got in, Irene found that the thread, as she had half expected, went up the old staircase, and a new thought struck her. She turned to Curdie and said,
My grandmother wants me. Do come up with me and see her. Then you will know that I have been telling you the truth. Do come. To please me, Curdie. I can't bear you should think I should say what is not true.
I never doubted you believed what you said.
returned Curdie.
I only thought you had some fancy in your head that was not correct.
But do come, dear Curdie.
The little miner could not withstand this appeal, and though he felt shy in what seemed to him such a huge grand house, he yielded and followed her up the stair. All right, there's chapter 21. So, Rolfe, what did you think of their grand escape out of the goblin mines?
I mean, I'm real glad that they got out all safe and whatnot, but I just wish Curdie would believe little Irene about the string that she was following by her grandmother.
Well, luckily it looks like in the next chapter, Curdie might meet her old grandmother himself.
But if she doesn't want to show herself? Like how she didn't want Looty to know she was there?
Yes, that would make Irene look like a little liar yet again. Jeez, everybody thinks Irene's a liar. Poor Irene.
Well, she's gonna prove old Curdy wrong! Yet again, she's really good at proving people wrong.
Except for when she isn't.
What?
Like when she tried to prove to Looty that the grandmother was there.
Oh yeah, so she's really good at proving people wrong, except for when she isn't.
Yep, that about sums up Irene's character, doesn't it? The next chapter is titled The Old Lady and Curdy, so I do think they will be meeting. Until next time, little peasants, sleep well, sweet dreams, and keep on peasanting.
Good night.
Good night.